This is another interesting type of join, very strong too and very attractive. I suppose you call it a finger join or a knuckle join, where you've got segmented parts that lock in together because they've been designed and cut that way. It's sort of a bit like a dovetail joint, but without the complications of the angles of the dovetails, and you can do this on your power saw. Here's how it's done. To do finger jointing, you'll be working with the wood up on end, up tall. So the first thing to do is to extend the face of your miter gauge and use some fairly substantial material. I've used 32mm MDF because you will be cutting a big notch in it here to allow the rip fence to come in to be used as a setting stop. And you don't want this piece of wood flexing at this point just above the notch. So make this fairly substantial material and try to make sure that it's reasonably square to the table. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it should be reasonably square to the table, and if necessary put some packers between the wood and the miter gauge to achieve that result. One other part of the setup is this little block clamped to the table. Now this has been positioned so that my gauge is just beyond the midpoint of the saw blade, the highest point of the saw blade past this face, to make sure that you complete the cut but don't push it too far necessarily. Notice how the foot of the G-clamp is pressing on the underside of the table skin, not on this edge here. You must never G-clamp to this edge, you may deform it. I've lowered the saw blade so that it's just very slightly proud of an offcut of the material I'll be using, so that each notch is as deep as this material is thick. And the pieces of wood are best done in multiples. You save time and you save a lot of chances for error. Now this is going to make a four-sided box finger jointed. So I've got my four pieces, they're all exactly the same width, exactly 125mm, but I've offset two of them, the middle two, by sitting them up on spacers. These two spacers are exactly 25mm, and then I've clamped the whole lot together with a couple of G-clamps. Now, I'm going to have 5 tongues and rebates on these pieces. Each tongue and rebate will be exactly 25mm wide, and that's why I've cut the pieces of wood to 125. Always take these spacers out, they're just giving you your offset, so that with each cut you're doing a tongue and a rebate in effect. And I'll arrange the pieces like this, up against my fence and up against the upstand of my miter gauge, and then I set a setting block in. I'll explain this in a moment. This little piece here, this setting block, is exactly 22.5mm wide, and this is just my stop block. Make sure that's nicely up against the fence, no clearance in there. Clamp that on. Okay, and now I can remove my setting block. And this setting block is 25mm less one blade width. I've taken off 2.5mm of my saw blade cuts, so that's 22.5mm wide, because you always have to allow for the first cut that you make when doing this. Don't count it twice or your tongue will be too wide, your rebate will be too wide. Now I've set the fence at 47.5. That's 47.5 to the inside of my saw blade, which means 50 to the outside, the right hand side of my blade. So the first cut will be exactly 50mm from this edge here. I can't use the safety guard and the dust collection, so I'll be using my face mask. And basically this is all there is to it. You have to be very careful with your first cut, your defining cut. Just make sure that everything's hard up against the fence and that you're correctly holding it. Okay, let's go. Now I'll move my fence out to 97.5, because I'm just going out by 50mm from 47.5 to 97.5, and then I've got my next defining cut. Just push this. Make sure you don't get any sawdust packed up in there. And now you have to move your setting block across as well, because everything's moved across by 50 mil. Like so. Take a bit of time with the first cut. Machining out the waste in between is really easy. The first cuts are the most important ones, first and last. And finally, 147.5. Another 50 mil. 145, 147.5. Watch that sawdust, it'll throw you right out. That looks perfect by eye. I'll do the other end and then see how it all fits together. Okay. Now this should theoretically all fit together. You can see the advantage of doing them 2 at a time now. 4 at a time rather. Okay, let's see how they go. Nice. These are, if anything, slightly too loose. Oh, that's quite a snug fit. Be very careful on your fence settings. It's always better to be a little bit tight than a little bit too loose. You can always ease it open slightly. But that makes a very strong joint, almost as classy as a dovetail without the complication of the angles. And it's very strong because you've got a lot of gluing faces and they're in different planes, so that will hold very well for drawers, for example. If you feel you've got a bit too much free movement in the jig when the fence is attached, then what you can do is undo these 2 knobs, remove them completely, and remove the protractor and take it out of the strip in the table. Place the protractor strip preferably on a block of steel, but you can also use some hardwood as well. And I'll just put this little packer under here to keep it nice and horizontal. Then take a flat-bottomed pin punch, not a sharp punch, and placing it in the middle of this little ledge here, give it a couple of taps with a hammer, experimental taps, like so, and like so, and just have a look and see if you've dented that in slightly. Yes, I have. So try this out now in your table. Try it in the table slot. That's a whisker too tight, if anything, but you should use some lubricant such as RP7 or WD-40 before testing this. And if you have overdone it a little bit in tightening up the strip, then you can just get the point of a large screwdriver and you should be able to lever it back out again a little bit and then test it again until you've got it nice and snug, even when you haven't got downward hand pressure holding the strip against the V-grooves.